In 1994, two sisters vanished from a farmhouse outside Hollow Creek, West Virginia. Their toys were left on the porch. Their mother swore she heard them giggling by the water just after dark. For 30 years, the town buried the story, until the ground gave one of them back. What happened beneath those hills isn't folklore. It's what the earth remembers when no one's left to tell the truth. Subscribe for full coverage. August 14th, 1994. The night Hollow Creek lost the Granger twins was thick with heat and rain. Cicadas shrieked from the walnut trees, and thunder crawled across the ridges like a restless animal. Inside the small clapboard house on Cranberry Road, Mary Granger tucked her daughters, Abby and Anna, aged 10, into their bright yellow tent pitched just beyond the porch. They'd begged to camp outside, swearing they were brave enough to handle a summer storm. Mary hesitated. The backyard backed right up to the old coal ridge, and the sound of Hollow Creek mine carried through the trees, even though the mine had been sealed since '87. The official story was methane leaks. Locals whispered about something worse. Still, the girls looked so proud in their matching pajamas that Mary relented. She left the porch light on, set a flashlight inside the tent, and kissed them each on the forehead. "Lock the screen door, Mom," Abby said. "I will, sweetheart." "Yell if you get scared." At 11:52 p.m., Mary poured herself iced tea and sat by the window watching lightning flash over the ridge. The glow illuminated the tent for a moment. Two small shadows moving inside, whispering, giggling. At 12:07, the power went out. She lit a candle, waited for the generator hum from next door, but the town had gone silent. Only rain on the roof. At 12:22, she went to check. The tent was empty, the flap unzipped. Rain had flattened the grass where two sleeping bags had been. Inside, a damp crayon note lay on the floor of the tent. "Gone to find Daddy in the mine." By 12:40 a.m., Mary was pounding on her neighbor's door screaming for help. The next morning, search teams combed the ridge, found small footprints leading toward the mine, and then nothing. The trail ended at the rusted gate, slick with mud. For weeks, the hills echoed with the shouts of volunteers and the whine of rescue dogs. No one ever found the twins, or the person who'd opened that gate. 31 years later, the creek still runs black after a storm, and the people of Hollow Creek still turn on their porch lights at night. May 17th, 2025. The town hadn't changed much, thought Detective Eleanor Brandt, watching the faded gas station sign flicker as she drove in. The same two-lane road, the same half-collapsed general store, the same uneasy quiet. She'd grown up one county over, close enough to remember the posters with the twins' smiling faces taped to every telephone pole. Now, 31 years later, she'd been called here because someone claimed to have found evidence. She parked in front of Harper's Diner, where Sheriff Lyle Benson waited, hat in hand. He looked older than his 60 years, skin weathered like bark. "Appreciate you coming, Detective. Folks around here still talk about the Granger girls like it was last summer." Brandt nodded. "You said a hunter found something?" Benson motioned her toward his cruiser. "Yeah, up by the old shaft entrance. Said he was tracking deer and stumbled on what looked like fabric." They drove in silence out toward the ridge. The forest pressed close on both sides, a blur of green and shadow. When they reached the gate, yellow tape fluttered in the wind. A crime scene tech knelt beside a shallow wash where spring rain had cut through the soil. He lifted a clear evidence bag. Inside, a small scrap of cloth patterned with faded daisies. Brandt crouched. "Children's pajama top." "Looks like it," the tech said. "Half buried about a foot down. Soil suggests it's been there decades," Benson sighed. Mary Granger swore she bought her girls matching daisy PJs that summer. Brandt studied the ground. The creek gurgled nearby, dark with silt. "You cordoned off the area?" "Soon as the hunter called it in. We'll get cadaver dogs tomorrow, weather allowing." She glanced toward the mine gate. Its padlock rusted, chain broken long ago. Anyone ever reopen this site? Benson shook his head. EPA did tests back in 2003. Said the tunnels were unstable, but we still get kids sneaking in. Couple fell through a shaft 10 years ago. Brant felt the damp air cling to her skin. Let's talk to Mary. The Granger house still stood on Cranberry Road, though the paint had peeled down to bare wood. A single rocking chair faced the yard where weeds now choked the fence. Mary opened the door before they knocked. She was in her 60s now, her eyes pale and hollow. "You found something," she said, voice trembling more with certainty than hope. Brant nodded gently. A piece of fabric near the ridge. "We'll know more once it's tested." Mary pressed a hand to her mouth. "I told them they were close. I could feel it every time it rained." Benson cleared his throat. "Mary, do you mind if Detective Brant asks a few questions?" She gestured them inside. The living room smelled of dust and lilacs. Photographs lined the mantel. Abby and Anna in pigtails, holding sparklers. Their father in a miner's helmet, smiling proudly. Brant scanned the photos. "Your husband worked at Hollow Creek Mine?" "Foreman," Mary said. "He died in the collapse of '87. They never brought up all the bodies. So when your daughters wrote that note, 'Gone to find Daddy in the mine,' they thought he was still down there." Mary finished softly. "Every time thunder rolled, Anna said it was Daddy talking through the mountain." Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of an old wall clock. Brant finally asked, "Was there anyone new around town that summer? Anyone paying special attention to the girls?" Mary hesitated. "A man came by a few weeks before they disappeared. Said he was doing geological surveys. Name was..." She closed her eyes, trying to remember. "Caro or Callow. Something like that. The girls called him Mr. C. He gave them licorice." Benson frowned. "We never found any record of that name." Mary looked toward the window, rain streaking the glass. He drove a green truck. Parked near the mine entrance most evenings. Brant jotted it down. "We'll run the name." "Do you still have any of their belongings from that night?" Mary stood slowly and opened a cedar chest. Inside lay 2 small sleeping bags, neatly folded, and a plastic lantern, its bulb burned out. She handed Brant a small object wrapped in cloth, a broken crayon, blue, labeled Anna G. "I keep it as proof they were real," she whispered. Brant felt a knot tighten in her chest. "We'll do everything we can, Mrs. Granger." Back at the motel that night, Brant laid the evidence photos across her bed. The fabric scrap, the mine entrance, the note. Rain drummed on the roof like a heartbeat. She opened her laptop, digging through archived reports. The 1994 investigation file was thin. Weather delays, lost samples, half-recorded witness statements. But one name popped out: Cal Rowe, a contractor who'd surveyed abandoned mines that summer. Never interviewed. Last known address, Huntington, West Virginia. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Outside, thunder rolled again. In her mind, she could almost hear 2 small voices whispering inside a yellow tent. The storm closing in. The next morning, fog hung low over Hollow Creek. The town looked ghostly. Trees dripping, streets slick, roof steaming from the night's rain. Detective Eleanor Brant drove past the rusted "Welcome to Hollow Creek" sign, coffee in one hand, the other tapping the steering wheel. Her GPS kept losing signal, but she didn't need it anymore. After only one day, she already felt the town's map seeping into her bones. The hollowed houses, the tired eyes, the mine ridge brooding at the horizon. At the sheriff's office, Lyle Benson was already pacing with a folder under his arm. "Got something," he said when she walked in. "You mentioned a Cal Rowe last night?" Ran his name through old DMV records. He owned a forest green Chevy Silverado, plates registered to Huntington. 1993. Brant took the folder. Inside were photocopied forms, faded with age. You ever track him down back then? Benson shook his head. He vanished same time the girls did. Never showed up for his next contract in Boone County. We figured he just moved on, or didn't. Brant murmured. You said the mine was sealed in '87. Any chance he went exploring? Benson frowned. Not unless he had a death wish. That shaft's half flooded. Still, miners around here never could resist going where they weren't supposed to. Brant looked up. I want to see the mine interior. The sheriff hesitated. EPA'll have my hide if you get hurt down there. I'll take responsibility. After a long pause, he sighed. Fine. But we go together. By mid-morning, they were standing at the gate again. 2 deputies had cleared brush away from the entrance. The air smelled of iron and wet stone. Benson handed Brant a headlamp. Watch your step. Shafts slick. They squeezed through the broken gate and ducked inside. The tunnel swallowed them. Light fading, water dripping from the ceiling in steady ticks. Their flashlights revealed remnants of rails, a few rusted carts, graffiti scrawled on the walls. Hollow Creek never dies. A few yards in, Brant spotted something half buried in silt. She crouched, brushing away the mud. A child's shoe, small white canvas, the sole peeled open like a mouth. Benson exhaled sharply. That's been down here a long time. She turned it over carefully, noting the faded sticker inside, a blue heart. We'll get it bagged. They moved deeper. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber supported by wooden beams darkened with age. Here, the air was colder, heavier. Brant's light caught a line of handprints smeared along the rock wall, small, child-sized, preserved in dried mud. Her breath hitched. Kids were here, she whispered. Benson stepped closer, or somebody wanted us to think so. A faint sound drifted through the tunnel, a hollow knocking, rhythmic, distant. Both froze. You hear that? She asked. Old mines settle, Benson said quickly, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. They listened. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 again. Brant followed the sound with her beam toward a narrow side shaft, mostly collapsed. Water shimmered at the entrance. The air smelled faintly of sulfur. Benson grabbed her arm. That's far enough, Brant. We'll send the team tomorrow. She wanted to argue, but the way the floor creaked beneath her boots convinced her otherwise. They backed out slowly, leaving the echoing darkness behind. Outside, sunlight pierced the mist, harsh after the mine's gloom. Benson wiped sweat from his brow. You good? Yeah, Brant said, though her pulse still thundered. I want the lab to fast-track that shoe and the fabric scrap. If they match the Granger girls, we reopen this officially. It's never really closed, Benson muttered. By afternoon, Brant drove to Huntington following the DMV lead. The road snaked through ridges dense with pine and kudzu. Old billboards advertised coal jobs long gone. She found the address listed for Cal Row, a boarded-up bungalow near an overgrown rail yard. The neighbors, 2 elderly men sitting on lawn chairs, looked up as she approached. Morning, she greeted. I'm looking for a man named Cal Row. Ever know him? One of them squinted through his glasses. Row? Hell yeah. Geology fella. Came around early 90s, talking about surveying old mines. Kept to himself mostly. When did he leave? The man scratched his chin. Summer of '94, right before that Hollow Creek story hit the news. Left his dog behind. Poor thing howled for days. Did he ever have kids around? Visitors? Not that we saw. But there was a teenage boy stayed with him some weekends. Skinny kid, maybe 14. Rowe said it was his nephew. Any idea where the boy is now? The neighbor shook his head. Never saw him again after Rowe left. Brant handed over her card. If anything comes back to you, please call. Inside the bungalow, dust coated everything. She pried open the back door. The hinges groaned. The air smelled of mold and gasoline. In what had been the living room stood a collapsed desk. Beneath it, she found a metal file box, locked but rusted. She pried it open with her penknife. Inside, maps of the mine system, Polaroid photos of the ridge, and one water-damaged notebook. She turned pages carefully. Rows of coordinates, sketches of tunnels, and a note scrawled in the margin. Access through vent shaft B3. Children's laughter near gate. Possible subsidence. Her stomach tightened. The last page held a date. August 12th, 1994. 2 days before the twins disappeared. Back in her car, Brant called Benson. "You ever hear of a secondary shaft labeled B3? He paused. "Yeah, that's a ventilation tunnel about half a mile from the main entrance. It caved in after the closure. Rowe's notes mention it. I think he was using it to enter the mine. You think he took the girls? I think he was down there when they disappeared. Maybe he saw something. Or caused it." Benson sighed. "We'll need a bigger crew to clear that shaft. The ground's unstable." "Then start making calls," she said. That evening, back in Hollow Creek, Brant stopped at the diner. Locals filled the booths, voices low, glancing her way as she entered. Small towns always felt like this. Half curiosity, half warning. Waitress June Harper poured her coffee. "You're the detective, right? Looking into the twins?" Brant nodded. "Trying to." June hesitated. "You know, I was 16 back then. Babysat for Mary a few times. That night I saw headlights by the ridge around midnight. Green truck. I told the old sheriff, but he said it was probably kids drinking." Brant leaned forward. "Are you sure it was green?" June nodded. "Metallic green. I remember because lightning hit close by, and for a second the whole truck lit up." "Did you see the driver?" "No, ma'am. Just the shape of someone getting out. Tall, and I swear, I heard music, like an old radio playing from inside the truck." Brant's pulse quickened. "What song?" June frowned, thinking. "Something slow. A hymn, maybe. Sounded like, 'Shall we gather at the river?'" Brant wrote it down. "If you think of anything else." June cut her off, glancing toward the window where rain had started again. "Detective, you go digging in that mine. You be careful. People say the mountain doesn't like to give up its dead." Back in her motel, Brant replayed the conversation in her mind. A hymn, a green truck, a geologist who vanished. She laid out the Polaroids from Rowe's box across the table. Most showed rock walls and bore samples, but one image froze her breath. 2 small shapes near the mouth of the mine, indistinct but unmistakable. Children. Scrawled beneath in faded ink. "They come back when it rains." Outside, thunder rolled again, rattling the windows. Rain pressed against the motel window like a heartbeat. Detective Eleanor Brant couldn't sleep. The Polaroid lay on the table before her. The blurred outlines of 2 children standing at the mine mouth. The caption written in a shaky hand. "They come back when it rains." The power flickered. Hollow Creek's nights always felt half alive, as if the hills themselves breathed. She pulled on her jacket, grabbed her recorder, and stepped outside into the downpour. The sheriff's office sat dark except for a single lamp in the front room. Lyle Benson looked up from his desk when she entered. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She dropped the photo in front of him. Taken by Cal Rowe. Same ridge, maybe the same night he studied it, squinting. "Looks like shapes in the fog to me." Or 2 girls walking out of the mine. He rubbed his temples. "Dogs are due at daybreak. We can open the vent shaft after the rain stops." Brant sat opposite him. "You ever go down that far?" "Once," he said quietly. "After the collapse. We heard knocking down there for 2 days. Then it stopped." Lightning flashed through the window. For a moment, both of them were silent, listening to the thunder echo across the hollow. Dawn came gray and dripping. The rescue team arrived in 2 battered pickups. Local volunteers, rope coils slung over their shoulders, coffee steaming from thermoses. They followed a muddy logging road up the ridge where mist clung to the trees. The B3 vent shaft was nothing more than a rusted grate, half buried under fallen branches. When they cleared it, a breath of cold air sighed up from below, carrying the smell of metal and wet clay. Brant switched on her headlamp. "How deep?" "About 80 feet, a crewman said. "Old ladder's mostly gone. We'll lower a camera first." The screen on the monitor showed the descent. Rough stone walls, a trickle of water, then an open chamber glimmering with something pale. "Freeze that," Brant said. The camera steadied. The light reflected off a curve of fabric half submerged in silt. "Could be more of the same pajamas," Benson muttered. Brant's jaw tightened. "We need to go down." She descended first, boots slipping on the damp metal rungs. The shaft breathed around her, cold, steady, whispering air. At the bottom, her light swept across the chamber. A small tunnel branched off, partially collapsed. Inside the mud-slick wall, something white protruded. She knelt, brushing soil away with her gloved hand. It wasn't fabric this time. It was bone. "Femur," she said softly into her radio. "Child-sized?" Benson's voice crackled through. "We're calling the medical examiner." "Stay put, Brant." But she barely heard him. The tunnel ahead curved downward, and faintly, just faintly, she thought she heard water dripping in rhythm. Not random, not natural. 3 drops. Pause. 3 again. The same pattern as the knocking. She aimed her flashlight deeper into the dark. The beam caught something metallic wedged between stones. An old flashlight, corroded green. On its side, etched into the metal with a penknife, were the initials CR. Brant turned the corroded flashlight over in her palm. The engraving was rough, but clear enough. CR. Cal Rowe. He'd been here. Water trickled past her boots, carrying flecks of mica that shimmered in her headlamp's glow. She crouched, listening. The rhythmic drip had faded, replaced by something softer, the faint rustle of fabric in moving air. "Sheriff," she said into the radio, keeping her voice low. "There's another passage down here narrow. I'm checking it out before it floods. Brant, don't!" Benson's voice broke up in static. The rock swallowed the signal. She moved forward anyway. The passage shrank, forcing her to crawl. Mud smeared her sleeves, and the light ahead turned a strange amber hue. Then she saw it. A small underground chamber, circular, with wooden beams arranged like a rib cage. In the center stood an old camping lantern, its glass blackened with soot. Beside it lay a tattered notebook, the cover warped but still legible. She flipped it open carefully. Water stains blurred most of the words, but a few lines stood out. "They come when the creek swells. The ground breathes. I keep hearing them laugh. The twins know the way back. I only showed them." Brant's stomach clenched. She looked around the chamber. Scratches marked the walls in uneven rows, as though someone had kept count of days. In one corner, a bundle of blankets had fossilized into the mud. Underneath, she found something that made her breath hitch, a small wooden hairbrush with faded pink paint. The initials AG burned into the handle. Abigail Granger. She backed away, trembling. Whoever Cal Rowe had been, he hadn't just explored the mine. He'd lived down here, and maybe he hadn't been alone. Behind her, a faint creak echoed from the shaft. Brant swung her light, heart pounding. For a second, she thought she saw movement, a figure at the edge of the beam, tall, shoulders stooped. Then it was gone. Only dust motes swirled in the air. She called out, "Hello, Sheriff, is that you?" Silence. Then, distantly, the same 3 knocks. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. They came from above this time. Her pulse spiked. She turned off her lamp, letting darkness settle so her ears could guide her. The knocks repeated, slower, like someone signaling from the vent shaft. Brant switched her light back on and scrambled toward the ladder. Halfway up, she saw boots descending. Sheriff Benson's. Relief flooded her until he shouted, "Hold still, rope slipping." He reached her, out of breath. "Ground's unstable. We gotta get you topside before this whole thing collapses." "Sheriff, I found bones, child-sized, and Rose things." "There's more deeper in." "He lived here." Benson's face hardened. "Then we'll get the crime scene crew down tomorrow. For now, move." They climbed together. Halfway up, a deep groan rumbled through the tunnel. Rocks cascaded from the ceiling, the ladder swaying. Brant clung to the rung. Benson grabbed her wrist, pulling her free as the lower half of the ladder tore away into darkness. They emerged gasping into the rain. Behind them, the shaft exhaled a plume of dust. Then silence. Brant lay on the ground, staring at the clouds churning overhead. Benson sat beside her, breathing hard. "You all right?" She nodded. "He was down there, Lyle. Cal Rowe. And those kids, maybe not just the twins. There could be more." Benson's gaze shifted toward the trees. "Lord help us if that's true." A gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying the faint sound of water rushing below. Brant looked back at the sealed hole. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard laughter, soft, high, and distant, rising from the earth before the rain drowned it out. Morning light struggled through the clouds, weak and metallic. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of stone and electricity. Detective Eleanor Brant stood by her motel window, watching fog snake along the ridgeline. Her boots were still crusted with mine mud, the images from the night before replayed like a film strip. The bone, the hairbrush, the strange carved initials. The phone rang. She snatched it up. "Brant. Lab confirmed partial DNA from the shoe you found yesterday," Sheriff Benson said. "Matches the Granger line." Brant closed her eyes. "So it's them. Abigail for sure. We're still running the second sample. State police are sending divers to the creek near town this afternoon. The ridge drains into it. Could explain why the ground keeps shifting. I'll meet them there." She hung up and stared at the map spread across the table. The mine tunnels traced beneath the valley like veins. One of the lines ended beneath the old Granger farmhouse, the very place the twins had vanished from 16 years ago. The farmhouse sat at the far edge of Hollow Creek, long abandoned. Weeds swallowed the porch, and the wind moaned through broken shutters. Benson met her at the gate, coffee in hand. "Been condemned for a decade," he said. "Folks claim they hear things inside when the water rises." "Let's find out why," Brant replied. They stepped inside. Dust danced in the shafts of morning light. The kitchen smelled of mildew and rusted pipes. In the living room, a warped wooden floor buckled near the fireplace. Brant knelt, tapping the boards with her flashlight. A hollow echo answered back. "Sub-basement?" she asked. Benson shrugged. "Never saw it on the blueprints." She pried up a loose plank with her pocket knife. Cold air rushed out, smelling faintly of river mud. Beneath the boards ran a narrow crawl space, dark and slick with moisture. "Hand me that light," she said. She lowered the beam. Water glimmered below, a trickle flowing through a natural fissure, the underground creek that gave the town its name. Something floated in it, caught against a joist. A strip of faded flannel. "Could be from Rowe," Benson muttered. Brant took a picture. Or from whoever came before him. They followed the sound of dripping to the back room, once a child's bedroom. The wallpaper peeled in curls, revealing chalk marks beneath, tiny handprints traced in pairs. "Look at this," she whispered. Benson bent closer. Kid's height. Same as the mine. Brant's phone buzzed. Text from the dive team. Arrived at site. Found submerged debris. Possible evidence. She straightened. "Let's go." The creek's telling us something. At the riverbank, the divers were already in the water. Mud churned as they surfaced with a tar-stained object between them. They placed it carefully on the tarp. A metal storage chest, padlock eaten through by rust. Brant crouched as one diver pried it open. Inside lay a stack of weather-sealed notebooks, a rusted lantern, and a cassette tape in a plastic bag. Name on the tape, the diver said, pointing. Cal Rowe. Brant's pulse quickened. The label was smeared, but the date was clear. August 15th, 1994, the day the twins disappeared. "Get that to the station immediately," she ordered. The diver nodded. Rain began again, soft but steady. The creek carried the sound downstream like whispered static. Brant stared into the water, watching it coil through the reeds. Somewhere beneath, the mountain was still moving, breathing. Back at the sheriff's office, the cassette deck looked ancient, coated in dust. Benson blew across it, sending a gray puff into the air. "Found this in storage," he muttered. "Last one in the county, probably." Brant set the cassette inside. Let's hear what Rowe had to say. The tape word crackled, then caught. A man's voice filled the room, low, deliberate, distorted by age. August 15th, Hollow Creek Survey, Day 17. Still hearing the girls in the tunnel. I tried to follow the sound, but the air turned bad. Thought I saw light, though. Like a lantern swinging. Brant and Benson exchanged a glance. "The sheriff says they're missing, but I don't think they're gone. The mine's alive. You can hear it whisper if you listen long enough. It keeps saying their names." The tape crackled again. Something thumped faintly in the background, maybe dripping water, maybe footsteps. "If I don't make it back up, it'll take me like it took 'em." I marked the way with chalk. "Tell Mary Granger I tried to bring him home." Then silence. The tape clicked to an end. Benson rewound it halfway, listening again to that final phrase. He marked the way with chalk. Brant rose. "We saw handprints in the farmhouse, remember? And in the mine. You think Rowe was trying to lead someone out? Or warn them not to go further?" She looked toward the rain-slick window where Hollow Creek ran beyond the trees. He was obsessed with bringing the twins back. But if the girls never left that mine... Benson's voice dropped. Maybe he thought he could dig them out himself. That evening, they returned to the farmhouse with a crime scene team. Floodlights threw pale circles across the property. Inside, technicians photographed the floorboards while Brant followed the faint sound of trickling water under the foundation. She paused at the old fireplace. A loose stone caught her eye, slightly ajar. The mortar around it fresh compared to the others. She worked it free. Behind it, something gleamed. A small tin box wrapped in wax paper. She opened it. Inside lay a child's bracelet of glass beads and a Polaroid, the colors leached by time. Two girls, Abby and Anna Granger, sitting on a porch step. Behind them stood a man whose face had been carefully scratched out with something sharp. Only his outline remained. Benson came up behind her. "What is it?" "Proof someone came back here after the disappearance," she pointed to the background. "This isn't the Granger porch. Look, tree line's different. That's the ridge by the mine." He whistled softly. "So whoever took him brought him up there, maybe made this photo as a trophy." Brant slipped the Polaroid into an evidence bag. "Or as a record." Thunder rumbled far off, rolling through the valley. For a long moment, they listened to the distant echo of it beneath the floorboards, mingled with the soft pulse of water. Brant spoke first. "The creek runs right under us." Maybe Rowe wasn't hearing ghosts at all. Maybe it was the current carrying sound from below, from wherever he was trapped. Benson adjusted his hat. And maybe that's why it comes back when it rains. They stood in silence, the floor creaking under their boots. Somewhere deep beneath them, a hollow knock sounded. 3 times, deliberate and patient. Brant's eyes met Benson's. Neither moved. Outside, the floodlights flickered. By dawn, Hollow Creek had swollen beyond its banks. Rain from the mountains turned the water into a heaving gray serpent cutting through the valley. Fallen branches and torn bits of lumber tumbled downstream, vanishing into the current. Detective Eleanor Brandt stood with Sheriff Benson near the bridge, watching the river churn beneath them. A team of searchers combed the embankment below, their boots sinking into the mud. "Whole town's built on water and luck," Benson muttered. "One runs out, the other floods you." Brandt's gaze followed the current as it dragged debris toward a bend. Rose tape mentioned the girls' names. He heard them down there, under the ridge. But if the creek runs straight beneath the Granger place, there could be a second outlet. Benson nodded slowly. "Where the current reemerges, there's a sinkhole near the old lumber road. Locals call it the drain." "Show me." The drive out was slick and narrow, winding through dense pines. Fog clung to the treetops, and the air grew colder the higher they climbed. At the end of the road stood a small clearing half swallowed by undergrowth. The sinkhole gaped in the center, 20 feet across and rimmed with rock. Water gushed from it, forming a narrow stream that fed the river below. The sound was constant, like a deep sigh. Brandt crouched near the edge, shining her flashlight into the rushing water. The beam caught flashes of metal far below, something large wedged against the rocks. "Could be debris," Benson said, "or a vehicle. Call the divers back." Within an hour, a crane truck and rescue team had arrived. Ropes, pulleys, floodlights. The men worked wordlessly as rain began again, thin and cold. When the cable finally tightened, the shape beneath the surface groaned upward through the mud. A rusted green Silverado broke the water's skin, dripping black silt and weeds. Benson exhaled. "Well, I'll be damned." The truck bed was filled with stones, as though someone had tried to weigh it down. Brandt stepped closer, her reflection wavering in the windshield. Inside, something pale floated against the glass. "Stop," she ordered. "Get forensics down here now." The team froze. Brandt peered through the murky glass, heart hammering. The shape was small, wrapped in plastic, hair swirling in the water like thread. She swallowed hard. "There's a body." By afternoon, the storm eased. The body, too degraded for immediate identification, was taken to the morgue in a sealed container. Brandt stood outside the tent, rainwater dripping from her hair, staring at the Silverado under its tarp. "Plates match Rose," Benson said quietly. "The green truck from the reports. Looks like he went in head first. Probably an accident during the flood that year." Brandt shook her head. "No accident. The stones in the truck bed. Someone wanted it buried." She glanced toward the woods, where the creek disappeared underground again. "The same someone who scratched his face out of that photograph." Benson frowned. "You think Rowe was murdered?" "I think he found something he wasn't supposed to." A deputy jogged up with a clipboard. "Labs fast-tracking the remains. Should have preliminary results by nightfall." Brandt nodded, but her gaze stayed on the water flowing out of the sinkhole. The current was calmer now, smooth and deceptively gentle. Yet beneath that surface, she could almost feel the pull, the river taking everything it wanted and keeping the rest. And somewhere down there, maybe more than one secret still waited. The morgue lights were too bright, their hum blending with the slow tick of water dripping from Brandt's coat. She stood beside the examination table while the coroner, Dr. Miriam Torres, peeled back the tarp. What remained of the body was more suggestion than shape. Bones laced with river silt, tatters of flannel clinging to the ribs. Torres lifted a plastic sleeve containing a thin silver bracelet. "Found this tangled in the fabric," she said. "Engraved initials CR. Cal Rowe," Brandt murmured. Torres nodded. "Male, mid-40s at death. Cause is tricky. Lungs full of silt, but there's blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. He didn't drown first. Someone made sure he wouldn't surface. Brant stared at the broken skull. Murdered, then dumped in his own truck. Benson exhaled behind her. Which means whoever killed him knew that mine as well as he did. Torres removed her gloves. There's something else. She handed Brant a small evidence bag containing a paper scrap. Edges water-rotted but legible under plastic. They're still below me. Brant felt a chill crawl up her arms. Back outside, dusk pressed over Hollow Creek like wet wool. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Brant leaned against her car, watching the last of the rain slip into the gutters. Roe tried to help those kids, she said quietly. He must have found their bodies, or thought he could. Someone silenced him before he talked. Benson folded his arms. Question is who? Only folks with reason were the mining company and whoever reopened that shaft. She pulled the old notebook from her coat pocket, the one found beside Roe's lantern. The pages stuck together, but one fragment caught her eye now that it was dry. I'm not alone down here. He comes with the storm. He, Brant repeated. Could mean the mine foreman, maybe someone from the old crew. Benson rubbed his jaw. Mary's husband, John Granger, was foreman before the collapse. Everyone assumed he died in it, but his body was never recovered, she said slowly. They exchanged a look that held both disbelief and dread. By nightfall, they were back at the Granger house. The air smelled of wet pine and old earth. Brant walked through the darkened rooms until she reached the child's bedroom again. The handprints on the wall seemed clearer now in the flashlight's beam, chalk still clinging after all these years. John Granger, she whispered. If he survived the collapse, maybe he was trapped down there. Maybe Roe found him. Benson's voice was low. You think he killed Roe? If he blamed him for stirring things up, or for failing to save his daughters, maybe. She brushed her hand along the wall. Chalk dust smeared her fingers. Beneath the prints, another mark appeared. Letters etched shallowly into the plaster. J.G. Her pulse jumped. He was here. Lightning flared through the window, illuminating the floorboards. For a moment she thought she saw movement, a shadow slipping across the far wall, then gone. Did you see that? She asked. Benson nodded slowly. Could have been a branch outside, but both knew it hadn't sounded like the wind. A sudden creak echoed from below, deep and deliberate. The same 3 beats. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3. Brant raised her flashlight toward the gap in the floor. Water glistened beneath, rippling as if something had just moved through it. Lyle, she said quietly. The creak's rising again. He stepped closer, hand on his revolver, though they both knew bullets wouldn't help against water or ghosts. The house trembled faintly, timbers groaning as the current surged below. Brant leaned over the hole, listening. For an instant, she could swear she heard a child's voice carried up with the rush, a faint giggle swallowed by the dark. Then the sound was gone, leaving only the steady, patient breathing of Hollow Creek beneath their feet. Dawn came bruised and heavy, the air thick with fog and coal dust. Detective Eleanor Brant parked by the sheriff's office, the engine ticking as it cooled. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that quiet laughter rising through the floorboards of the Granger house. Inside, Sheriff Benson nursed black coffee, eyes red-rimmed. State Forensics sent an update overnight, he said, sliding a fax across the desk. DNA from the second shoe matches Anna Granger. Both girls were down there. No doubt Brant read the line twice. So they died underground. Looks that way. But Roe's injuries say he died years later, which means somebody survived long enough to kill him. Benson leaned back, sighing. John Granger was listed among the dead in the '87 collapse, but the mine company never recovered all the bodies. 5 unaccounted for, including him. I pulled the old incident file. He opened a worn folder. Grainy photos showed twisted beams, flooded tunnels, and a younger man in a miner's helmet, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed. John Granger. In one image, he stood beside another worker labeled E. Keller. "Who's Keller?" Brandt asked. "Electrician. Only one who made it out alive." "Still around?" Benson nodded slowly. "Lives out by the ridge. Never talks about the mine." The road wound upward through trees beaded with rain. The Keller property sat at the edge of the forest, a sagging trailer surrounded by rusting appliances. A dog barked somewhere unseen. Benson knocked. After a moment, a man appeared in the doorway, gray-haired, eyes sharp despite the tremor in his hands. "Mr. Keller?" "We're investigating the Hollow Creek disappearances," Brandt said. He studied her for a long beat, then stepped aside. "Guess it was only a matter of time." Inside, the air smelled of oil and cigarettes. Maps of the mine covered one wall, tacked up with old nails. Keller sank into a chair, rubbing his palms. "John Granger," Brandt began. "What happened to him the night of the collapse?" Keller's eyes flicked toward the maps. "You've heard the company's story. Methane pocket, blast, roof gave way. But that wasn't all. We'd hit a new vein that shouldn't have been there. Granger said the readings were wrong, that the ground felt hollow. He sent the rest of us up top while he went to check. Then the explosion hit." He swallowed hard. "I went back down the next day with the rescue team. We heard knocking from the other side of a fall. Could have sworn it was him. But the foreman ordered us out. Said gas levels were too high." "Foreman?" Benson asked. "Different guy by then, company man named Caldwell. He sealed the shaft within hours. Told us no one could have lived." Brandt studied Keller's lined face. "But you think John Granger did?" Keller hesitated, then nodded. "A week later, I found fresh footprints near the ventilation tunnel. Bare ones, size of a man's." I told Caldwell, and next day my contract was pulled. Never worked again. Silence filled the trailer except for the ticking of rain on metal. Brandt said quietly, "If he survived, he might have stayed underground, close to the creek system. Rowe could have found him decades later." Keller looked up sharply. "Rowe, that's the surveyor, right?" "Yeah. I saw his truck once by the ridge in '94. Thought it was company business." "Guess not." He leaned forward. "Detective, if Granger's still alive down there, he ain't the same man you're hoping to find." Brandt felt a chill spread through her chest. "Why do you say that?" Keller's voice dropped to a rasp. "Because sometimes, when the creek runs high, I still hear him knocking back." Brandt and Benson left Keller's trailer just as the clouds began to thin. A pale stripe of sunlight cut through the mist, glinting off puddles in the dirt road. Neither spoke until they reached the car. Benson leaned against the hood, rubbing his face. "You buy his story?" Brandt stared toward the ridge where the trees bent in the wind. "If he's lying, he's been doing it for 30 years. He didn't look like a man who sleeps easy." They drove back toward town, silence broken only by the engine and the distant murmur of the creek. At the curve where the road dipped toward Hollow Creek, Brandt slowed. Something glinted in the mud ahead. She stopped, stepped out, and crouched. A piece of metal half buried at the edge of the culvert. An old miner's tag, stamped JG 1072. "Identification tag," Benson said quietly behind her. "John Granger's number." She turned it over in her gloved hand. "So he made it this far." "Or someone wanted us to think he did." Brandt pocketed the tag and looked toward the ridge. Either way, the ground's still talking. That evening, Brandt spread Keller's maps across the motel bed. The lines of tunnels looked like tangled veins, each marked in faded pencil. At the bottom corner, a small notation caught her eye. "Surface seep, creek crossover, Granger claim." She traced the path with her pen. The line ran from the main shaft to a point less than a mile from Keller's property, right beneath the abandoned church on St. Mary's Hill. Benson called just then. "State lab confirmed something else," he said. "Blood residue on Rowe's flashlight handle. Not his. Genetic markers line up with the Granger family. Male. Adult John, Brant said. That, or another relative. She stared at the map again. I think I know where he went after the collapse. There's an old creek tunnel under St. Mary's. If he followed the water, it would have led him straight there. Benson hesitated. That church has been closed 20 years. Folks said the foundation kept shifting. You really think he's hiding under a chapel? Where else would a dead man go to bury his sins? By nightfall, fog had swallowed the town. Brant parked near the abandoned church, its steeple leaning like a broken finger. The door hung half open, banging softly in the wind. Inside, dust coated the pews, and the scent of mildew mixed with candle wax long burned away. Her flashlight swept across the altar, empty but for a cracked statue of the Virgin. Behind it, the floor had collapsed in a jagged oval, revealing the black mouth of a tunnel. Water glistened below, running quietly through stone. Benson climbed in after her, breathing hard. You sure about this? No, but if Granger's alive, this is where the creek carries his voice. They descended slowly. The air grew colder, damp against their skin. The tunnel widened into a cavern streaked with mineral veins. On one wall, words had been carved into the rock, rough but legible in the flashlight beam. They brought the mountain down. I kept the light. Benson's voice was barely a whisper. He's been here. Brant scanned the ground. Footprints, fresh, smeared by moisture, leading deeper into the darkness. A sudden clang echoed ahead, metal striking stone. Both froze. Hello? Brant called. Her voice bounced down the tunnel and came back warped, half a second late. Then came a sound that froze the breath in her throat. A low, uneven whistle, like a miner's tune carried through miles of rock. Benson raised his gun. He's real, he breathed. Brant stepped forward, the beam trembling in her hand. Mr. Granger? The whistling stopped. For a long, terrible moment, there was only the rush of the creek below and the faint smell of wet iron. Then, from the dark ahead, came 3 slow knocks. The sound hung in the dark. 3 slow knocks, echoing through the tunnel until it was hard to tell if they came from ahead or behind. Detective Eleanor Brant steadied her flashlight, its beam cutting across slick rock and glistening water veins. Beside her, Sheriff Benson held his revolver tight, every muscle taut. John Granger, she called again, voice echoing. This is Detective Brant. We're here to help. Only the creek answered, whispering under the stone. Then came another sound. Something dragging, slow, deliberate. Benson swung his light toward the noise, illuminating a narrow passage to the left. The beam landed on a figure half shrouded by mist. A man, stooped, clothes hanging in tatters, beard streaked white. He shielded his eyes from the light with a trembling hand. Jesus, Benson breathed. Brant lowered her flashlight slightly, heart hammering. John Granger? The man didn't speak. His gaze darted between them and the darkness behind, like an animal cornered. She took a cautious step forward. It's all right. You're safe now. His lips parted, voice raw from disuse. You shouldn't be here. Brant froze. How long have you been down here? He blinked slowly. The mountain doesn't count time. Benson holstered his gun but kept his distance. You've been missing since '87. Folks thought you died. Granger's face twitched, almost a smile. Maybe I did. The flashlight beam caught something metallic strapped to his chest. A miner's lamp, ancient but still faintly glowing. Its flicker painted the tunnel walls in gold. Brant's voice softened. We found your daughter's things, John. We're trying to bring them home. His eyes glistened at the word. They came looking for me. I told them not to. What happened? He looked past her, into the dark where the creek vanished. When the roof fell, I followed the water. It led me here. I heard them calling from above. Then the rocks moved and the air changed. I waited. Benson stepped closer. Waited for what? Them, he whispered. And then for him. Brant exchanged a look with the sheriff. Who, John? Granger's breath hitched. The man with the green light. Said he could help dig them out. But the mountain doesn't like to be opened. It took him to Cal Row. Granger nodded faintly. He said their names. He said he'd bring them up. I tried to warn him. Now he sings with the water. A chill ran through Brant's spine. Did you kill him? Granger's eyes lifted to hers, hollow and steady. I buried what was left. Silence filled the tunnel except for dripping water. Show us, Brant said quietly. He hesitated, then turned deeper into the darkness. Bring your light, but step where I step, or you'll wake the creek. They followed him down a narrow slope. The air grew colder, the sound of running water louder. The passage opened into a low cavern, illuminated by faint light from cracks in the ceiling. In the center, surrounded by stones, lay a mound of earth marked with a cross made of rusted tools. Beneath it, a helmet lay half buried, initials faintly visible. C.R. Granger knelt before it. He wouldn't stop digging. I told him the mountain would swallow him. He didn't believe Brant knelt opposite him. Did you see my girls after that night? Granger's voice broke. They were so small. I tried to lead them out, but the water rose. I heard them laughing one last time, like they were already gone. He pressed a trembling hand against the dirt mound. I kept the light for them. The faint flicker from his lamp wavered as if the earth itself breathed beneath them. The beam from Brant's flashlight trembled slightly as she scanned the cavern walls. Each surface was carved with short marks, hundreds of them, clustered in uneven rows. Not symbols, days. You counted the time, she said softly. Granger didn't answer. His lamp flickered, throwing shadows like breathing things. Every knock of the creek is a heartbeat. Every flood is a year Benson walked the perimeter, light glancing off old tools, buckets, scraps of paper hardened into stone. He's been living down here like some kind of hermit. How'd he survive? Granger's mouth twisted. The mountain feeds its own. Brant studied him. He was gaunt, yes, but alert. His eyes had none of the dullness of madness she'd expected. You could have gone back. You could have left. He smiled faintly, a hollow curve of lips. Leave? I tried. The tunnels close when you turn your back. I was meant to keep the light. What light? Granger rose, slow but steady, and motioned them deeper into the cavern. The one that remembers. He led them toward a fissure at the far side where a thin stream flowed from the wall. The water glowed faintly blue, catching their beams like glass. As they approached, Brant realized the shimmer came from hundreds of shards embedded in the rock. Broken glass lanterns, bottles, fragments of mirror. Granger's voice dropped to a whisper. They said they were afraid of the dark. So I gave them light. When the storm comes, the creek carries it back to them. Brant knelt, touched the stream. It was cold enough to burn. This is where the sound comes from, the current moving through the glass. Benson crouched beside her. Like an organ. Water making its own music. She looked up at Granger. You've kept this going all these years. He nodded. If I stop, they'll fade. The mountain forgets everything except what you feed it. Brant's throat tightened. John, you've been living with ghosts. He turned toward her, eyes bright and wet. No, they're alive in the creek. You'll hear them too if you listen, right? Benson straightened slowly. We need to get you out, John. There's a town up there and Mary's still waiting. The miner flinched as though struck. Mary? Number. She left. They all did. Only the creek stayed. Brant reached out carefully, touching his arm. She's alive. She's been waiting 31 years. His breath hitched. For a heartbeat, something human flickered behind his eyes. Alive? Yes, come with us. You can tell her what happened. He looked at the tunnel behind them, at the darkness that seemed to pulse with each drip of water. If I leave, the light will die. We'll keep it for you, she said gently. You don't have to stay. Granger's gaze lingered on her face as though weighing her words against the mountain's will. Then, slowly, he unstrapped the lamp from his chest. The flame guttered once, twice. Take it, he whispered. It remembers more than I do. Brant accepted it carefully, its metal warm despite the chill air. A low rumble shuddered through the cavern. Pebbles rattled, and a crack split along the ceiling. Water surged from the fissure, cold and fast. Benson grabbed Brant's shoulder. Time to go. They turned toward the passage, but Granger stayed kneeling by the stream. John, Brant shouted, come on. He shook his head. The creek's taken me back. That's how it's meant to end. The rumble deepened into a roar. She took one step toward him, but the ground shifted. Benson hauled her back as the wall collapsed, a rush of black water swallowing the chamber. The last thing she saw before the light winked out was John Granger's lamp flickering under the torrent, burning even as the mountain reclaimed him. The roar swallowed their voices. Water surged through the tunnel, slamming against the stone walls. Brant hit the ground hard, the flashlight flying from her hand and spinning across the current like a shard of white light. Benson's shout was lost to the rush. Move! He yelled, grabbing her arm. Together they fought upstream, boots slipping on the slick rock. The passage was flooding fast, filling from the chamber where John Granger had vanished. Brant felt the cold bite into her legs, numbing her as she clawed for footing. This way, she gasped, pointing toward a narrow crawl space branching upward. They squeezed through, lungs burning, the sound of the creek growing distant behind them. When they finally reached higher ground, they collapsed in the dark, coughing. Benson's flashlight flickered weakly, revealing the edges of carved stone steps leading up. A maintenance shaft, perhaps once part of the mining system. Guess the church builders didn't know they were sitting on a river, Benson said, voice ragged. Brant leaned against the wall, dripping. He knew, she whispered. Granger kept that light going, all this time. They climbed in silence. The shaft ended at a rusted grate that gave way with one kick, spilling them into the rear of the church. The air outside was cool, dawn brushing the horizon with pale orange. They had been underground all night. Benson sank onto the stone steps, catching his breath. You think he's gone? Brant stared at the gaping hole in the floor. A faint shimmer still pulsed from below, the last reflection of Granger's lamp. He's where he wanted to be. She reached into her pocket and drew out the lamp he had given her. The flame inside sputtered but hadn't died. She held it close, the metal warm against her palms. He said it remembers. They returned to the station hours later, clothes stiff with mud and silt. Deputy Moore met them at the door, eyes wide. Good God, what happened to you two? Cave collapse under St. Mary's, Benson said. We found Granger. Moore froze. Found as in, alive? Brant met his gaze. For a while. She set the lamp on the desk. Moore stared at it like it was a relic. We'll need to get a team down there. If that tunnel's connected to the old mine, it could stretch half the county already called State Rescue, Benson said. They're bringing sonar gear, divers, the works. Brant said nothing, still watching the tiny flame flicker inside the lamp. Later, in the evidence room, she cleaned the mud from Granger's miner's tag, JG1072. She placed it beside the lamp, then pulled out the old photo Keller had shown her. John Granger, his wife Mary, and their two little girls standing before the mine entrance. The resemblance between John and the man she had met underground was undeniable. But there was something else in that photo she hadn't noticed before. A faint shape in the shadows behind the family, like another figure watching from the trees. She brought the image closer to the light. The silhouette's outline was oddly distinct. A tall man, shoulders squared, face obscured by glare. Benson entered quietly. Rescue team setting up at the church. They said the lower tunnels are flooded. Might take days to clear, Brandt pointed to the photo. You see him? Benson leaned closer, squinting. Could be a shadow. Or somebody behind the photographer, or someone who never left. Benson frowned. You think Granger wasn't alone all this time? Brandt's expression darkened. He said the creek feeds its own. Maybe he meant more than ghosts. By mid-afternoon, the once silent grounds around St. Mary's Church had become a hive of movement. Rescue trucks, floodlights, and survey equipment surrounded the sagging building like a field hospital. Brandt stood beside Benson near the yellow perimeter tape, the miner's lamp flickering faintly on the hood of his car. Structural team says the tunnel's unstable, Benson muttered. They'll send divers down in cycles, but it's a mess down there. Twisted metal, full collapse in parts. Brandt shielded her eyes from the glare of the work lights. If John Granger didn't survive the flood, there's still something he left behind. He said the mountain remembers. I think he meant it literally. Benson glanced at her. You think there's more than a grave down there? She nodded. Something he wanted found. A voice called from the excavation pit. Chief Diver Ellis, his wetsuit dripping. We reached a secondary chamber about 15 meters in. You'll want to see this. Brandt and Benson followed him down a muddy slope to the mouth of the shaft, where thick hoses pumped out murky water. Inside, the air smelled of limestone and old oil. Ellis led them through knee-deep water to a newly exposed alcove. There, half buried in silt, stood a wooden crate sealed with pitch. Carved roughly into its lid were 3 initials, A.G.G. Mary Grace Halbrook, Benson murmured. His daughter. Brandt knelt, hands trembling as Ellis pried the lid open with a crowbar. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bundles of faded notebooks and a small metal box. The notebooks were warped from moisture, pages filled with cramped writing and sketches of tunnels, light patterns, dates. This isn't a journal, Brandt said, flipping through carefully. It's a record. Water levels, seismic shifts. Every flood, every cave-in. She pointed to a note scrawled across one page. When the creek rises, the mountain breathes. Ellis opened the metal box. Inside lay several objects preserved under waxed cloth. A rosary, a child's hair ribbon, a locket, each labeled with a date. The last entry was from 2009. That's impossible, Benson whispered. He couldn't have written that. He'd have been dead for years. Brandt turned another page. The handwriting in later entries was shakier, but the ink fresh. Someone kept this going after him. Someone else down here. Ellis's radio crackled. Chief, sonar's reading movement in the lower channel. Could be a current, could be something else. They froze. Movement? Benson repeated. As in, alive? Can't say, but it's steady. Human-sized. Brandt's pulse quickened. Get another diver down there. Within minutes, 2 divers slipped beneath the dark surface, their headlamps glowing like fireflies. The radio hissed with static and bursts of breathing. Visibility 5 feet. Chamber narrows. Wait, there's... The transmission cut off in a sharp burst of static. Then silence. Ellis cursed under his breath, tightening his grip on the line. We've lost comms. Brandt leaned over the edge. Pull them back. The winch groaned as the line reeled in. A minute later, only 1 diver surfaced, gasping, eyes wide with terror. Something grabbed him, he panted. Hand came from the wall, pulled him in. There's something alive down there. Ellis stared, disbelief warring with fear. A hand? The diver nodded, trembling. Not skeletal. Flesh. Gray. Like stone that moves. Benson's jaw tightened. You're telling me a corpse just reached out of a rock? The diver met his gaze. No, sir. Not a corpse. It was breathing. The words hung in the dripping silence. Brant looked toward the tunnel where cold air still drifted from below. The miner's lamp, resting on the nearby rock, guttered and then flared, its flame burning blue. "The creek remembers," she whispered, "and it doesn't forget who it keeps." By dawn, mist had crept back into the valley, soft as gauze, muffling the clatter of the rescue camp. The floodlights had gone cold, replaced by the gray light of morning. Brant stood by the creek that wound behind St. Mary's Church, watching the water move sluggishly through the mud. The current was clouded, but every so often, a gleam of reflected light pulsed beneath the surface, like something breathing below. Benson joined her, steaming coffee in hand. "Divers called it quits for the night. They'll go again once the current settles." She nodded absently. "You talked to the survivor?" "Yeah, shaken to hell but coherent. Swears he saw a person, said the hand came out from a gap in the wall, grabbed his partner, and pulled him in." Brant's eyes stayed fixed on the creek. "John Granger said the mountain feeds its own. Maybe this is what he meant." Benson took a long drink of coffee, jaw tightening. "You think someone's still living down there, after all these years?" She didn't answer right away. "The journals we found go up to 2009. That's 22 years after the collapse. Someone kept writing. If not Granger, then whoever took his place." They watched as a gust of wind rippled the surface of the water. A piece of wood bumped against the embankment, an old plank, worn smooth, carved with the same initials burned into the crate. M.G. H. Brant crouched, tracing the letters with her gloved thumb. Mary Grace Halbrook. He carved her name into everything he kept. Benson's gaze softened. He was built in a graveyard for memories. She stood slowly. Or a warning. An hour later, the state rescue team's heavy equipment arrived. Pumps, ground sonar, and a crane to stabilize the church foundation. Brant oversaw the setup while Benson coordinated with the sheriff's department. The lead engineer, a wiry man named Dr. Kent, approached her with a clipboard. "We've mapped 3 primary chambers beneath the church. 2 are partially flooded, 1 collapsed. But there's a smaller cavity farther down, narrow, isolated. Doesn't match the mine's original schematics." Brant leaned over the printout. "A new chamber?" He nodded. "Looks man-made, reinforced with wood supports. Someone's been maintaining it. How deep?" 40 meters. Benson joined them. "Too deep for an accident survivor." Kent hesitated. "Not necessarily. We found airflow readings. Fresh oxygen's being pulled through somewhere." Brant's heart gave a sharp, quick beat. "A vent, or an opening, could connect to the creek system." She exchanged a look with Benson. "If someone's alive down there, that's how they've survived." Kent adjusted his glasses. "We'll lower a thermal camera tonight. Until then, it's too unstable for people." Brant stared at the outline of the tunnel on the printout, the small red dot marking the unknown cavity. There's something he wanted us to see. The journals, the lamp, the carvings. It's all leading somewhere. By late afternoon, the wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain. Brant took a walk down the slope toward the original creek bed. The ground was slick, pocked with hoof prints and half-buried stones. She stopped where the water curved around a cluster of willows. Something jutted from the mud, a length of old rope tied around a post. She knelt, brushing away silt. Not rope. Braided hair, stiff with age, bound with twine. Her breath caught. "Oh, God." Benson heard her and hurried down the bank. "What is it?" Brant stepped aside, voice barely steady. "It's not just one." Benson crouched beside her. The rope was part of a larger tangle, each strand plaited, looped, and knotted into the earth. Dozens of them, braided together like a ritual boundary. "The creek keeps what it loves," Brant whispered, hearing Granger's voice in her mind, "and it never lets go." The first reaction from the rescue crew was disbelief. Then the silence set in. the kind that spreads like cold. Brant and Benson stood at the edge of the creek while two forensic techs moved in, their gloves wet with silt as they lifted the tangle of braids into separate sample bags. "It's human," one said softly. "At least a dozen separate strands. Old, but not fossilized." "How old?" Brant asked. "Hard to say without lab work. Could be decades." She felt the weight of the air pressing down. "Granger's daughters disappeared 31 years ago." Benson rubbed the back of his neck. "You think this is them?" Brant didn't answer. The thought was unbearable. But the truth in Hollow Creek never stayed buried. A sudden shout drew their attention upslope. One of the surveyors was waving frantically near the church foundation. "You need to see this." They climbed to where the team had excavated the main shaft entrance. Fresh earth had collapsed inward, exposing a narrow chamber sealed behind a slab of shale. The engineer, Dr. Kent, held up a flashlight. "This wall wasn't natural," he said. "It was built to hide something." Benson crouched. "Can we open it?" "With care." Kent directed a small crew to chisel along the edges. The shale split with a dull crack, and a draft of cold air hissed out. Brant steadied her light and peered inside. The space beyond was small, barely a room, lined with wood panels and bits of glass. Dozens of old photographs were pinned to the boards, their edges warped and blackened by damp. Each photo showed the same creek at different times of year, frozen in winter, blooming in spring, swollen in flood. But in every frame, a faint figure stood near the water's edge. Sometimes a child, sometimes taller, always turned slightly away. Benson's voice was hoarse. He was watching the creek. Or she was. Brant moved closer. In the farthest corner, beneath layers of mineral dust, a single photograph was sealed in plastic. A woman holding two little girls, all smiling, all standing in front of a red wagon. The note beneath it read, "For those who never left." She exhaled slowly. "Mary." Kent cleared his throat. "There's more." He aimed his flashlight downward. A box sat against the wall, its lid carved with the same initials as before, MGH. Inside were small keepsakes, a set of carved wooden dolls, a gold locket, and a folded letter sealed in wax. Brant unsealed it carefully. The ink was faded but legible. If anyone finds this, the creek was not a curse. "It's a gate. The ones it takes do not die. They stay. The mountain keeps them because we forgot how to listen. Tell Mary I tried. Tell her the light never went out." Signed simply, J.G. Brant's voice faltered as she read the last line aloud. Benson bowed his head. He knew she'd come looking. He said quietly. The rescue team stood in respectful silence, the only sound the hum of pumps draining the tunnel. Then, from somewhere deep within the rock, came a faint echo, a knock, slow and deliberate. Kent froze. "That's not machinery." Brant turned off her flashlight. The others followed, plunging the chamber into darkness. In the quiet, the sound came again. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 2 more. Benson whispered, "That same rhythm, the one we heard underground." Brant's heart pounded. "He's gone," she said softly, "but the mountain remembers his pattern." The final knock echoed once, and then the sound faded back into the stone. When she switched her light on again, the flame inside Granger's lamp, set on a nearby rock, flared bright without her touching it. It burned steady, impossibly strong against the damp air. "The ones who stayed," she murmured. "They're still keeping watch." Morning came thin and colorless. The sky hung low over Hollow Creek, swollen with fog, and the air hummed with the dull rhythm of generators near St. Mary's Church. Detective Eleanor Brant leaned against her car, watching state investigators haul crates of evidence toward the mobile lab. The creek behind the church had thinned overnight, its current calmer now but streaked with a faint film of silver light. "Water samples strange," Dr. Kent said, approaching with a clipboard. Heavy mineral content, iron, manganese, but something else too. Trace levels of phosphor, almost luminescent. Same material that made Granger's lamp glow. Brant frowned. You're saying the water itself was fueling it? He nodded. Looks that way. Whatever it is, it's been leaching out from under the ridge for decades. Benson joined them, hat pulled low against the drizzle. State's calling this a hazardous site now. EPA wants to shut the whole area down before we even finish searching. Brant's jaw tightened. Not yet. There's still a missing diver down there, and whatever's making that light. Benson sighed. You think we're gonna find him alive? She didn't answer. She kept watching the water, its surface strangely still, like glass stretched over a secret. By noon, she was at the edge of the main river where Hollow Creek emptied into a broad valley reservoir. The floodplain stretched wide, cattails swaying in the wet breeze. She'd driven out alone, following the current's course downstream. The locals called this place the Mouth, a low bend where the creek met the river. It was quiet except for the hiss of wind over the reeds and the far-off drone of cicadas. She knelt at the water line and filled a vial with river water. The surface shimmered faintly, same pale blue as the glow from the mine. When she shook it, the particles danced like dust in sunlight. As she stood, movement caught her eye upstream. A figure near the trees, half hidden by mist. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a miner's coat mottled with mud. Her chest tightened. "John," she whispered. The figure turned, but the face was in shadow. Then it stepped backward into the fog and was gone. Brant walked quickly toward the spot, heart hammering. Only footprints remained in the damp soil, bare ones large, the heel marks deep. They led toward the river and vanished at the edge where the current quickened. She crouched, touching the last print. The earth was cold, pulsing faintly beneath her fingers as if alive. An engine rumbled behind her. Benson's truck pulled up on the dirt road. "You always gotta wander off alone," he called, climbing out. "Had to see where the creek ends," she said. He looked down at the footprints. "What the hell?" "They're fresh." He glanced at her, voice low. "Granger's gone, Brant. We saw that water bury him. I know what we saw. But maybe the creek gives back what it takes." Benson sighed. "If that's true, we're dealing with something we can't arrest." Brant turned toward the river, her reflection fractured across the current. It's not about arresting anymore. It's about understanding why he stayed. From far downstream came a hollow sound, a distant, rhythmic knocking carried on the wind. Benson froze. "Please tell me that's a boat." "No boats," Brant said softly. "Not for miles." They listened as the sound faded, replaced by the rush of water sliding over stone. Benson looked at her. "What now?" Brant gazed at the horizon where the river disappeared into mist. "Now we follow the current." The road followed the river south, a ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through wet fields. The mist thickened as they drove, blurring the tree line into shifting shapes. Brant kept her eyes on the glint of water beside them, the current flowing faster now, bright streaks of blue light pulsing beneath the surface. "Water's glowing stronger," Benson muttered. "Never seen anything like that outside a coal runoff." Brant leaned forward, studying the rippling phosphor. Maybe Granger didn't discover something unnatural. Maybe he made it. His lantern, those glass shards. He found a way to trap light underground. Maybe the creek learned from him. Benson gave her a sidelong glance. "You make it sound alive." She didn't answer. The river curved ahead, narrowing toward a set of low cliffs where the current plunged into a natural gorge. Foam and mist rose like smoke from the falls. They stopped at the overlook. The sound was deafening, a roar that filled the air and vibrated through the bones. Brant stepped out first, shielding her face from the spray. Below, the water churned in a deep basin before disappearing under a rock shelf, a natural siphon feeding into the earth again. The glow beneath the surface was unmistakable, spreading in veins that pulsed outward like lightning caught under glass. Benson joined her, staring down. "That's not reflection. It's moving." Brant nodded slowly. "The creek breathes. It's pulling air through the mountain and back out here, like lungs." They watched as something drifted up through the foam. At first it looked like driftwood, then like bone, then a shape wrapped in fabric. "Body?" Benson said grimly. He scrambled for the radio. "Dispatch, we've got possible remains downstream of Hollow Creek, below the falls." The current spun the shape once before lodging it against a rock outcropping. Brant knelt at the edge, lowering a pole. The cloth tore under pressure, revealing a pale wrist, smooth, small, a child's bracelet still circling it. Her breath caught. Abigail. Together they waded into the freezing shallows, pulling the small form free. It was only partial remains, bones fused with fabric, but there was no mistaking the ribbon of yellow hair tangled in the threads. Benson whispered, "We found her." Brant stared at the body cradled in the silt, and the creek gave her back. A sudden gust of wind rippled the water, and the glow beneath shifted, brightening until the whole basin shimmered like liquid glass. In its depths, shapes seemed to move, small, weightless, spinning slowly. Children. For an instant, she saw them. Two figures side by side, holding hands beneath the surface, faces turned upward. Their outlines blurred, then scattered like dust as the light dimmed again. Benson crossed himself, voice hoarse. "Tell me you didn't see that." Brant's eyes stung, but she couldn't look away. They're part of it now. He wasn't keeping them underground. He was keeping them together. The glow faded entirely, leaving only dark water and the steady sound of the falls. Benson laid a hand on her shoulder. "We'll bring her home proper this time." She nodded, voice barely a whisper. Both of them. They wrapped what they could recover, marking the site for retrieval. The wind shifted, carrying a sound through the gorge. Soft, rhythmic, almost like a song. Benson turned. "You hear that?" Brant closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It was faint, but distinct. The same hymn June Harper had described weeks earlier. "Shall we gather at the river?" The melody faded into the rush of water, leaving only the steady heartbeat of the creek as it carried the past downstream. Brant opened her eyes. "It's over," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "But it never really ends here, does it?" Benson shook his head. "Not in Hollow Creek." They stood there as the river moved on, carrying light and memory out toward the horizon. By evening, the ridge had gone quiet again. Floodlights burned around St. Mary's, and the rescue camp had become a sprawl of tarps and coffee thermoses. The recovered remains from the river were sealed in evidence bags, tagged, and handed gently into a waiting van. Detective Eleanor Brant stood apart from the others, watching as the van disappeared down the dirt road toward the morgue. The ache in her chest was a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that at least one of the Granger girls had been found. Grief that the mountain had claimed so much before giving even that small mercy back. Sheriff Benson came up beside her, shoulders hunched in his old coat. "State folks will be gone by tomorrow. We'll keep the site closed till they finish cataloging." She nodded. "The case is solved enough for their paperwork, but not for me." He half smiled. "You never could leave ghosts alone." Brant reached into her satchel and drew out one of John Granger's notebooks. Pages still damp, but readable. She'd spent half the afternoon decoding his neat, deliberate handwriting. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "The creek has memory. It carries sound the way air carries breath. Every voice that ever called through these tunnels leaves an imprint, and when the water moves just right, they return. That's why the dead speak in the rain." Benson whistled softly. "Sounds like poetry to me." He wasn't poetic, she said. He was cataloging an effect, like echo recording. Moving water reflecting low-frequency sound. The tunnels became an amplifier, so those knocks, that hymn we heard. Residual sound. A natural tape loop. He rubbed his jaw. Hell of a ghost story. Brant looked out across the ridge. The wind carried faint mist from the falls, glinting where the work lights hit it. Maybe that's what truth looks like here. Half science, half prayer. Later, inside the tent that served as her field office, she spread the journals across the table. Mud-stained pages formed a chronology of 30 years underground. Drawings of the mine's veins, the creek's course, and notes in Granger's shaky hand. One entry near the end caught her eye. "The mountain hums. When it stops, it means the river has taken someone new." She turned another page. "If I stop the light, it will forget them. So I feed it, one shard at a time." Her gaze lingered on the words "feed it." "He wasn't speaking metaphorically," she murmured. "He was using the glass, the metal, maybe even phosphorus runoff to sustain combustion in the underground air. That glow wasn't spiritual, it was chemical." But another line beneath it froze her. "The light keeps their voices." "That's why I stay." Brant closed the notebook slowly. He stayed because he could hear them. Rain began again, light but steady, tapping the tent canvas. The sound drew her back to the night she'd first come here. The lightning, the note in crayon, the empty tent. The mountain's hum was gone now, replaced by water falling soft through the trees. Benson poked his head in. "Kent's pulling his crew at dawn. You want me to leave the lamp with evidence?" She looked at the miner's lamp, burning faintly on the table. "No," she said quietly. "Leave it here tonight." Benson nodded and stepped back out into the rain. Brant sat in the dim glow, listening. For a while there was only the whisper of water. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the ridge, came a soft knock. 3 beats, a pause, and 2 more. She closed her eyes. "I hear you," she whispered. The lamp's flame flickered as the wind rattled the tent flap. Brant sat alone at the small folding table, the notebook open before her, pages rippling in the draft. Beyond the canvas walls, the rain softened into a steady whisper, a rhythm that echoed faintly against the ridge. She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion catching up to her. The notebook's lines blurred into patterns of dark and light, maps, numbers, and beneath them, the faintest impression of handwriting in a different ink. She tilted the page under the lamp's glow. Words emerged in faint blue script, scrawled between Granger's notes. "You found what we left. Follow the current home." Brant's breath caught. She flipped the page, scanning quickly. More ghostly lines appeared. The ink water paled, but still legible. "The mountain doesn't keep us. It remembers us until someone listens." She set the notebook down, pulse quickening. The handwriting wasn't Granger's. It was smaller, looping, delicate. A child's hand. She rose, pushing aside the tent flap. The rain had nearly stopped, replaced by a low mist curling through the camp. Work lights buzzed faintly, throwing halos through the fog. The creek beyond the tree line gleamed like mercury, flowing quiet and constant. The lamp's flame guttered behind her, dimming to blue. "Abby?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The name felt strange, reverent. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying a sound. A soft laugh, faint as a memory. She stepped closer to the creek. The ground was slick, and the mist swirled low around her boots. The water shimmered faintly, pulsing with that same impossible phosphorescence. Something drifted beneath the surface. A reflection, maybe, or 2 faint outlines. She crouched, the water's chill brushing her fingertips. "I found you," she said softly. "You can rest now." The current rippled, forming concentric circles around her hand. For a heartbeat, she heard the echo of her own voice repeated in the water's murmur. But layered beneath it were 2 smaller voices, whispering her name. Benson's shout cut through the quiet. "Brant! You out here?" She turned. He emerged from the fog, flashlight cutting across her face. "You shouldn't be near that creek at night," he said, breathless. "Kent says the ground's still unstable." "I had to see it once more." Benson frowned, noticing the notebook in her hand. "What's that?" "Granger's final pages," she said. "But there's more than his words here." She flipped to the ghost writing again, showing him the faint lines. He squinted. "Can't make it out." "Then listen," she said, holding the notebook close to the water. The creek hissed softly against the rocks, and somewhere deep within its flow came a faint melody, the same hymn that had followed them since the start. "Shall we gather at the river?" Benson froze. "You hearing that too?" "Yes." The lamp's flame behind them flared suddenly, its glow reflecting across the creek like sunrise through glass. For a moment, the entire surface shimmered with light. Benson whispered, "What in God's name?" Brant's eyes filled with tears she didn't fully understand. "Not God," she said quietly. "Just memory." The light softened, then receded as the creek resumed its normal flow. The hymn faded with it, leaving only the rain's distant hush. Benson stood silent for a long time, then said, "We'll close the case tomorrow." Brant nodded. "Tomorrow." As they turned back toward camp, she looked once more at the water. The surface was still, but just before she stepped away, two small ripples spread outward, as though someone unseen had let go of her hand. Morning came clear for the first time in weeks. The clouds had broken, leaving the ridge gold and wet in the early sun. Hollow Creek looked softer under light, less a wound, more a scar that had finally started to heal. Detective Eleanor Brant stood at the edge of the Granger property once more. The porch boards creaked under her boots. The house was quieter now, stripped of its legends and fear, just an old home on the edge of the woods. Inside, Mary Granger sat by the window, a knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The years had settled into her face like fine dust, but her eyes, pale gray, steady, were clearer than Brant remembered. "You found them," Mary said, not as a question but a statement. Brant nodded. "The river brought them back. Not whole, but home." Mary's hands trembled as she pressed them together. "I dreamed of that night every time it rained. I kept waiting for the creek to give them up." She looked toward the window where sunlight touched the overgrown yard. "I always left the porch light on just in case." Brant reached into her coat and placed the small miner's lamp on the table between them. It was cold now, the flame long gone, but the glass still faintly iridescent with that strange blue sheen. "He kept this for them," Brant said. "Your husband. He was alive for years after the collapse. He tried to bring them home." Mary closed her eyes. "I used to think I could still hear him sometimes, calling from the ridge. Maybe I wasn't wrong." She reached out, her thin fingers tracing the lamp's metal edge. "He loved that light." Said it could guide him through anything. Brant hesitated. "There's more. We found his journals. The creek. It wasn't just water to him. He believed it remembered voices. The echoes we heard, the knocks. He thought they were the mountain keeping them alive somehow." Mary smiled faintly. "John always said memory is a kind of living." They sat in the silence, sunlight drifting across the room. Outside, birds called across the trees, the air washed clean after the long storm. When Brant finally rose to leave, Mary caught her hand. "You've carried them far enough," she said softly. "Let them rest now." Brant swallowed against the lump in her throat. "I'll try." The funeral took place 3 days later under a cloudless sky. 2 small coffins, pale wood and simple, rested side by side near the churchyard that overlooked the valley. The whole town came, old miners, young families, reporters who whispered quietly on the road. Benson stood with Brant at the back, "Never thought I'd see this town quiet," he murmured. "Maybe it's the first time it's listening," she said. When the priest finished his prayer, Mary stepped forward. In her hands she held the miner's lamp. She set it gently between the graves, then struck a match. The wick caught with a soft glow. Blue-white, steady. People murmured, stepping back. The light burned stronger than any oil flame should, flickering against the sunlight but refusing to fade. Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "You can rest now, my loves. Your daddy's waiting." The wind carried her words down the valley. The flame wavered once, twice, then steadied. That night, Brant couldn't sleep. She drove out to the overlook above the falls, parking where she could see the river twisting silver through the dark. The moon hung low, reflecting across the current. She stepped out, coat pulled tight, and listened. For the first time since arriving in Hollow Creek, the mountain was still. No knocks, no echo of hymns, just water moving quietly over stone. She walked to the edge where the cliff met the gorge. The air smelled of moss and coal and clean rain. Down below, faint specks of light shimmered under the surface, drifting like fireflies trapped in glass. She took the notebook from her pocket, the one that had survived everything, and opened to the final page. The handwriting there, hers now, was neat and careful. Case closed. Remains identified as Abigail and Anna Granger. Secondary remains confirmed as John Granger, deceased. Primary cause of death: drowning, secondary trauma from collapse, possible evidence of post-incident survival for extended period underground. All items cataloged, Hollow Creek mine to be sealed permanently under state order. She stared at the words, then added one more line. The water remembers. Closing the book, she looked back at the falls. A faint shimmer pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, slow and peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered into the night. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and something faintly metallic. Somewhere far below, the current struck stone and made a low, musical hum. She smiled. Goodbye, John. By morning, she'd left Hollow Creek behind. The town was already returning to its quiet routines, porch lights glowing, smoke curling from chimneys. The mine ridge stood silent under mist. As her car wound down the highway, Brant caught one last glimpse of the valley in her rear-view mirror. The creek flashed once, catching sunlight just so, a single bright glint like a reflection from glass, or from a lamp burning somewhere deep below. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw two small shapes running along the bank, hand in hand, their laughter lost in the wind. Then the road turned, and Hollow Creek disappeared behind the trees. Fog drifted low across the valley as morning light touched the trees. From above, Hollow Creek looked smaller than it once had, a sliver of green and gray. The creek a thin silver thread winding through it. The town was quiet now, though the locals still said that when it rained, the valley whispered. Inside what had once been the Granger family church, the air smelled of varnish and stone. The building had been converted into a small museum years ago. Display cases lined the walls with photographs of miners, yellowed newspaper clippings, and rusted tools from the old shaft. Near the center stood a glass box containing a single object, the miner's lamp. Its metal was dull, its glass cracked around the edges, yet a faint bluish film shimmered under the light. The placard below read simply, "Recovered 2022 from the Hollow Creek site, believed to have belonged to John Granger. Reportedly remained lit for 2 days after retrieval. Visitors often lingered there longer than anywhere else. Some swore the flame flickered when the weather turned. Others claimed to hear a soft hum, like a tune carried on a distant current. No one ever proved either. When the files from the Hollow Creek case were unsealed, part of Detective Eleanor Brant's report drew renewed attention. Most of it was factual, dates, times, forensic notes, but along the bottom margin, in her own handwriting, was a quiet reflection. The mountain doesn't haunt. It remembers. The water holds what we forget. No one could say what she meant, though a few reporters claimed that sentence alone reignited public fascination with the case. Scientists came with instruments to measure magnetic fields and soil resonance. Journalists hunted for new angles, while paranormal enthusiasts arrived with cameras, waiting for the light to move again. The creek remained silent. The lamp stayed dark. Years passed. Mary Granger lived alone until her death, still keeping her porch light on even after the county cut power to the ridge. When the volunteers cleared the property, they found a handwritten note taped to the kitchen window. "When it rains, listen closely." They only ever said goodnight. The word spread through town faster than any official update. The house became part of the historical site, though few stayed there long. Maintenance crews said the board sometimes creaked after sunset, as if someone were walking upstairs. No one laughed about it. When the story reached the internet again, it was through a video, a true crime documentary produced by a channel called Echo Lines. The host, Kayla Mendoza, stood before the overgrown mine entrance in a black raincoat, her voice calm and precise. "In Hollow Creek, West Virginia," she began, "the rain doesn't fall. It remembers." Her narration wove together archival clips, Brandt's field notes, and the audio that had been recovered from the mine site. Near the end of the video, she played the final field recording from Brandt's last night there. Beneath the steady hiss of rain and the murmur of water came a faint pattern, two overlapping voices humming a hymn. "Shall we gather at the river?" The video went viral overnight. The channel gained millions of new subscribers, and Hollow Creek saw its first influx of tourists in years. Yet when the county reopened part of the ridge as a walking path, it was clear most visitors weren't thrill seekers. They came quietly, carrying flowers or toys, leaving them by the water's edge. Detective Brandt never spoke publicly about the case again. She retired to Maine, where she spent her last years by the ocean. Every October, an envelope arrived at the Hollow Creek Museum containing a single pressed wildflower and a note that read, "Still listening." When she passed away, her niece found an old field recorder among her belongings. Most of the files were filled with the sound of rain or running water, but in one, between two long stretches of silence, a soft voice said her name. Then another, smaller, childlike, laughed. By the time 20 years had passed, Hollow Creek had changed. The mine shaft was sealed under federal order, the ground around it stabilized, and a narrow trail wound down from the ridge to the creek's edge. A wooden sign greeted hikers at the start of the path. Hollow Creek Memorial Trail, dedicated to Abigail, Anna, and John Granger. The water remembers. Locals said that after heavy rains, the creek still glowed faintly blue where it bent near the old bridge. Park rangers recorded the effect as chemical luminescence caused by minerals leaching through the limestone, but the people who lived nearby didn't buy it. When asked, they only said, "That's Hollow Creek breathing." Late one spring, after another flood season, a ranger discovered a new cave mouth cut into the ridge by runoff. Inside were drawings on the rock, rough, childlike, made with coal dust, and something that looked like chalk. The figures showed two children standing beside a man holding a lamp. Beneath the picture, 6 faint words had been etched into the wall. "We followed the current home again." The discovery made the local news. The cave was sealed for safety, and the story faded quickly from headlines, though some who had entered said they heard trickling water even when the ground was dry. That night, the creek's glow was visible all the way from town, bright enough to cast shadows across the hillside. By morning, it was gone. Years later, the story of Hollow Creek resurfaced once more, this time as part of a national documentary series about cold cases. The closing sequence lingered on the lamp in the museum. Its glass reflected the camera light, catching the faintest shimmer of blue. The narrator's voice came softly. "In every forgotten place, there are echoes that never truly fade." Some call them hauntings, others memory. But maybe they are the same thing. What remains when love outlasts everything else? The frame tightened on the lamp. A single drop of condensation rolled down the inside of the glass like a tear. The credits began to fade in. Outside, rain started falling on Hollow Creek again. The sound of it filled the valley, steady and rhythmic. Somewhere deep below the ridge, water struck stone in a familiar pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2. For those who stood near the creek that night, it was almost musical. Some thought it was just runoff echoing through caverns. Others believed the mountain was speaking again, softer this time, as if to say, "Thank you." At the end of the documentary's credits, Kayla Mendoza's voice returned, closer now, almost intimate, like she was whispering to whoever had stayed to watch until the last second. "If you've made it this far," she said, her tone both professional and reverent, "thank you for keeping their light alive. Don't forget to subscribe, and next week, we're heading to another small town with a long memory." The screen faded to black, but for an instant before it did, the lamp inside its glass case flickered once, just enough to cast a faint blue reflection across the empty museum floor. No one saw it happen in person. The surveillance camera caught it, though, the soft glow blooming in the dark like breath returning to lungs. It lasted barely a second before fading completely. Outside, the creek kept moving, its current whispering beneath the bridge. The rain slowed to a mist, and the sound of water against stone grew gentle, steady, almost like a lullaby. And if you stood there long enough, long after the cameras had gone and the lights were out, you could almost hear it. 2 small voices, laughing softly as they followed the current home.